Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tigard Public Library's online programming. I'm Anne Marie Anderson, and I'm one of the Reader Services team members here at the Tigard Library. Today, we're hearing from author and hiking authority William Sullivan as he takes us on a tour of a dozen new hikes he discovered while researching the newly released 5th edition of his guidebook, 100 Hikes in Northwest Oregon and Southwest Washington. William Sullivan is the author of 21 books about the Northwest, including 5 novels, as well as the popular 100 Hikes series. His journal of a 1,000-mile hike he took across Oregon, listening for Coyote, was chosen by the Oregon Cultural Heritage Commission as one of Oregon's 100 books, the most significant books in the state's history. Many of his guidebooks and novels are available in the Tigard Public Library collection, and you can also purchase them at local bookstores. So thank you so much for joining us, Bill.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here on a beautiful day when you actually could be out hiking instead of watching your screen at home. But I figure people who are doing this really want to know where they can go and have a good time. So I thought I'd start by introducing myself a little bit. For those of you who are not familiar with me, my most famous book probably is this one, Listening for Coyote. It's the story of a 1,000-mile hike I took across Oregon. I wanted to kick off my research for all these books by visiting as many wilderness areas as I could in the state, and naively thought the easy way to do this would be to hike through them all at once. So I went from the westernmost point of the state at Cape Blanco, alone with a backpack, to the easternmost point of the state in Hell's Canyon in 2 months. And along the way, I kept this journal of my adventures. So down in the Klamath Mountains near Grants Pass is where I was held at gunpoint by marijuana growers. And then up near the Three Sisters, I poisoned myself with mushrooms, another bright idea when you're alone in the woods, and wound up hiking 40 miles a day through Hell's Canyon, trying to outrun these October snowstorms. And to this day, it amazes me that people read this book and it makes them want to go hiking. I think it'd scare them away, but it's kind of become a classic. It was chosen one of Oregon's 100 books. My other adventure memoir is the true story of the log cabin that my wife and I built by hand out in the wilds of Oregon's Coast Range. There is no road here, even today. We were just there last week, and you have to hike in 1.5 miles to get to this cabin. And to do it the authentic way, and because we were broke, we built it using only hand tools, no chainsaw, just a crosscut saw and an axe. So that is where I have a typewriter now, and I've written all of my novels out there. It's a great place to get away from, the smoke and fires and crowds and viruses and everything else. And everybody needs that. And that's one reason I'm going to be talking about great escapes that you can do here today. So one of the novels that I wrote out there was a murder mystery about a missing Einstein formula, and it was popular enough I did a sequel about D.B. Cooper, the great unsolved mystery of the Northwest. What happened to this guy who parachuted with $250,000 and got away with it? It's the only unsolved hijacking in the history of the FBI. So if he's alive, he'd be in his 70s, and so I have him living in Portland in plain sight, but getting into lots of mischief. That book required a sequel too. So the same detective came back to deal with the Rajneeshis. If you missed the 80s in Oregon, you missed when this guru from India brought thousands of people to build a city in Eastern Oregon and got into all kinds of mischief. So I have him reincarnated for this book, which is a little funny, but it's also a look at history. And I like to do that. I've done a whole series of historical novels about the Viking Age, the first about the start of the Viking Age in Norway. My wife's background is Danish and Norwegian, so we speak the language. Each of these books, and the second one just came out about Denmark, is based on the actual excavation of a real Viking ship. So you'll learn a lot about the archaeology, but then the alternate chapters are the Viking Age. See what that was really like. I am a 5th generation Oregonian. So I've done a couple of books about the state's history. On the left is the human history of the state with wagon train routes and gold mining ghost towns and how to find them all. And on the right is the natural history. So the floods, fires, earthquakes, volcanoes, the geology, and the story of what forest fires historically have been like and how they're changing. A couple of books that cover all of the state. On the left is the Adventurer's Guide to the Backwoods with detailed maps of every wilderness. And on the right is what my kids call the Wussy Hiking Guide. That's a little unfair, really. I just picked the most beautiful places in Oregon, including hot springs and bed and breakfasts, and as well as hikes, all in color. And the one on the left here trails in the whole of Pacific Northwest, and I did the text for that. But these 100 Hikes books have kind of been the reputation in Oregon because I have hiked every trail I could find in the state, and I go back and re-hike them on a 7-year schedule. And this last year, it was time to re-hike the trails around Portland. And so I found that to make up for all the trails that have burned or been closed or crowded, or there are lots of new ones that you can do that don't have those problems. So I want you to start right in your backyard here. This is Forest Park in Portland, and the 30-mile long Wildwood Trail that runs through Portland there. You can imagine you're not really in a city at all, except when you had to cross Burnside Street. And that dangerous crossing has been replaced with this very beautiful bridge designed by Ed Carpenter, a Portland artist who normally is known for doing airport lobbies. But here he's taken green and brown pipes and made them look, he says, like you're walking through a sword fern path through the forest. It makes a destination in itself. You walk there from the zoo in a 5-mile loop. Of course, another bridge that makes a great hiking loop possible is Tillicum Crossing, the only big bridge, the biggest bridge, I guess, in the country that's not open to cars. But you can hike a nice 4-mile loop there. But you want to get out of town, right? You don't want to go to Portland if you can avoid it. So you go to the Columbia Gorge, and oh no, the trails there are all closed. 3 years ago, there was the Eagle fire that burned up that whole area on the Oregon side. And then once the trails got fixed and reopened, then came the virus. And because they were going to be too crowded, there were people just jammed in, they closed the trails anyway for the to keep them social distancing. So if you're not going to go there, where can you go? How about right across the river in Washougal? This is a stone's throw from Portland, right across the river from Multnomah Falls, really. And it's a wildlife refuge in an area that actually had a campsite from Lewis and Clark in April of 1806. They camped there by the Columbia River and complained they could hardly sleep at night because the geese and the wildlife kept them awake with all the noise. But since then, this area was kind of industrialized. There were dairy farms, a sewage treatment plant, a lot of sawmills, but they did make a wildlife refuge there. And the people in running the refuge thought, well, the problem is that it's diked away from the river. Why don't we open up the dike and let the river come back in? And so that's what they're doing now. So this access, the trailhead off of Highway 14 is closed right now and will open again in 2 years when they finish their work changing this wildlife refuge to make it better for wildlife. In the meantime, you can get there from 2 trailheads that are further downriver, either at Captain William Clark Park or at the Steamboat Landing Park. And you can still hike the trails in the wildlife refuge. It's not crowded. You can take dogs with you on the dike, not in the refuge. And you can, again, take bicycles on the dike, but not in the refuge either. So the dike is a dike. It's not that, scenic, but when you get to the wildlife refuge, you see why they wanted to breach the dike. This was the fish ladder that allowed Gibbon Creek access to the Columbia River. And it didn't work well. The fish couldn't get up. how much better it would be if they just tore out the dike and the fish ladder and let the wildlife go into the wetlands when the river floods. The trail there includes bridges across these marshy lakes where you're certain to see great blue herons and lots of waterfowl, but also western pond turtles. These are pretty rare in Western Oregon, but they thrive there in those marshy lakes. If you start at Captain William Clark Park, which I guess is pretty much the campsite back from 1806, it's a lot different these days. It's extremely crowded on hot summer weekends because it's a great bathing beach. But then you can hike a mile into the refuge and explore the refuge. If you want a slightly longer hike, start at Steamboat Landing Park. And this was the steamboat landing for the Pendleton woolen mills there. They brought in a wool from Eastern Oregon and docked there and turned it into blankets in their Washougal factory. They still have the factory there, but the dock now is just sort of the trailhead for extending your hike on in to the wildlife refuge. Next year, they're going to, when they tear out that dike, they're going to move 1 million cubic feet of dirt and have to move the dike, raise Highway 14, and build a new trailhead. But you can access it this summer and this fall, this winter, through the Steamboat Landing and Clark Park. And then next year, they'll have a new trailhead and a new way in. A great hike, close to Portland, good for kids, lots of wildlife, no crowds, no fires, no permits. Another good place to get away from crowds and permits, surprisingly, is Mount St. Helens. None of the recent fires here in September had an impact at this amputated mountain, but of course, 1980 did. They lowered the top of the mountain by almost 2,000 feet when it blew up. A lot of that mountain landed here in Oregon, so I kind of feel we have a claim on it. The mountain has been rebuilding itself. The second lava dome seen here stopped growing in 2007, but at the rate these lava domes are growing, it will rebuild the entire mountain in about 2,000 years. And that's about on target because the entire summit of that mountain was less than 2,000 years old anyway. A new glacier has formed around this lava dome that is expanding. So you can go look at Mount St. Helens from the Johnston Ridge Observatory, but why not come from the Portland side to a little-known trail that's quiet? Again, no permits or crowds, no fires. It goes along the Kalama River from the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest into the National Monument. And the reason it's not so crowded, really, is because it starts at a horse camp. And there aren't that many equestrians there, and hikers and mountain bikers really haven't discovered it. But you can park there and hike. You are unlikely to meet any other people or horses either, but you're welcome to take a bike or a horse. And then it's, 3 or 4 miles up to McBride Flat, which used to be a lake until recently. I'll explain what happened there in a minute. And if you want, you could do the whole loop. It's about 12 miles, but that's really better on a horse because a lot of the last part of that loop is really on old logging roads. So we're starting out at this horse camp where they have a shelter and a trailhead, and you're following the Kalama River up into a forest that looks like it's not really damaged at all from the eruptions because this side of the mountain was shielded from the 1980 blast. But previous eruptions had left an awful lot of ash there. It is a great place for mushrooms in the fall. So starting right now, you're likely to see lots of mushrooms on this trail. Be aware that the one shown here is an amanita. This fly amanita shown here and the whole amanita family are actually the source of most mushroom poisonings in Oregon, with the white papery gills underneath, the polka dots on top that can wash off, a ring around the collar sometimes that may be absent, but do not eat amanita mushrooms. Know what you're doing if you're going to do that. You can see just below the layer of the moss that the entire forest is built on ash from previous eruptions. And as you hike further, you'll see where an ash flow and a flash flood has carved out a part of the Kalama River Canyon there and left this eroding ash cliff. When you get to McBride Flat, which used to be McBride Lake, that was a lake until 2004, just 16 years ago, when an ash flow from one of the amputated glaciers on the south side of Mount St. Helens ripped down here and filled the lake with debris. So it's now become a lovely meadow with a river washing through it. If you wanted to know where that ash flow came from, higher up on the mountain, that's another good hike that doesn't require permits. And although it looks like fire damage here, it's not. That's from the 2004 landslide and flash flood that swept through this area. And it did wash out the original trailhead, which was over by Sheep Canyon on the lower left here. But so now you start at Blue Lake at a new trailhead. And then if you want, you could just go to the Toutle River on the far left side, or you could do a loop all the way around Sheep Canyon. So here's where the road was closed by that flash flood and ash flow in 2004. And the start of the trail does look a little moonscapish, but then you enter you get to where the ash flow dammed Blue Lake. And I think Blue Lake is the wrong name for it. It really should be Green Lake. It's very green. And then undamaged forest with giant noble firs. These are like 4 or 5 feet in diameter. It's rare to find trees of that size, noble firs, anywhere in the Cascades. And here they're doing great. Then you get to Sheep Creek, and it's bridged by, the canyon's bridged by a footbridge here. There's a couple of little viewpoints you can do here, even a little campsite. You could turn back if you're hiking with kids, but why not continue and go on to the South Fork Toutle River, which really changed after the 1980 blast. That flash melted the Toutle Glacier, which came down here and ripped out this gorge and left a very difficult crossing. The Toutle Trail is a 25-mile loop, 25 or so mile loop that goes all the way around Mount St. Helens. And if you're backpacking, you could do that whole loop all the way around. Here, to get down to the Toutle River, you have to go lower yourself down on a rope, and then there is no bridge across the Toutle River, so it's good luck getting across on rocks. And then right straight on the other side, there's another rope going up that cliff. If that seems a little scary, it did to me, both the crossing and the rope thing, then instead do this loop around Sheep Canyon. It is up. You're gaining 1,000 feet in a mile from that crossing, and then you leave the blast zone and go back into these meadows right on the edge of the blast zone, where you have mountain bluebells blooming. Those bloom even late in the year, and these dwarf alpine lupin, and you pass the source of the landslide that wiped out McBride Lake and changed Blue Lake trailhead. So you get to learn a lot about what's happening at Mount St. Helens in a place without fires or crowds. Another place that you can go, surprisingly, I think, to get away from problems like that is Trapper Creek. And it's true that a fire this month in September burnt the top of the Trapper Creek Wilderness. Observation Peak also burnt the Suisun Creek Trail, a very popular area. But the lower part of Trapper Creek and Soda Peaks Lake is all still fine. And the roads may be closed for a while because of firefighters and all of that, but then should reopen. Now, at the bottom of this is sort of between Cascade Locks and Mount St. Helens in Washington State. The government mineral springs there at the bottom of Trapper Creek was it was a tourist attraction back in the 1800s. There was a 3-story hotel there that finally burned in 1934. They built a guard station there since then that you can rent if you'd like. But the hike that heads up Trapper Creek goes for 1.5 miles without really seeing the creek. So I recommend then taking a side trail over to this grove of giants. You see the creek and some gigantic trees. From there, you could continue up to Soda Peaks Lake, but it is so steep and so much elevation, thousands of feet of elevation gain. why not sneak there on the back road? There is a paved road that leads to a secret trailhead up high. So you can walk into Soda Peaks Lake with kids as a sort of an easy first backpack trip, maybe. The paved road is one lane and it's not all that good shape, but it's still paved. And so here we're going to start out now at the bottom at Government Mineral Springs with this 1937 guard station that you can rent. It's $65 a night. It's booked up quite a lot, though. And if you start out hiking there along the Trapper Creek Trail, you won't see the creek for a mile and a half, but then cross the creek on this bridge and get to this grove of giant trees, which I think is a good turning around point, because after that, the trail just zooms like a rocket up to Soda Peaks Lake. So what about this secret back door trailhead to Soda Peaks Lake? Well, it's not well marked, and I kind of like that. It's where the paved road ends, and you might see some cars parked around there and wonder what they're doing. Well, behind that backpack is the start of the trail. It does not look like a trail. You have to go 50 feet up there, and behind that tree is the trail sign and the message board and all of that. Sometimes having a trail a little bit hidden like that is a good thing. It cuts down on crowds, and only people who are in the know are likely to do the hike. Then you get up to a nice saddle where you have a view of all the mountains from Mount Rainier to Mount Hood, and then down to Soda Peaks Lake, where you could actually do a fun little backpack with kids. Next, I'm going to take you to Mount Adams. You can see this from that hike there at Trapper Creek at Soda Peaks Lake. Mount Adams is kind of the forgotten mountain of the Cascade Range, taller than Mount Hood, but and not in a national park like Mount Rainier. The reason I think it's overlooked partly is that you have to drive by another mountain to get there. From Portland, you have to go right past Mount Hood, or from Seattle, go right past Mount Rainier. Why not stop there? The part of it that really was most popular was on the south side, the South Climb Trailhead, and from there you could hike into Bird Creek Meadows. Problem: the entire eastern half of Mount Adams is owned by the Yakima Nation. It is an Indian reservation, and they have closed access to that reservation entirely there. So you cannot go to Bird Creek Meadows anymore. They got tired of the fires burning up the trails. They had fires in 2008 and 2012 and 2015. The road became unmanageable, and so they just said, forget it. Well, you could still climb Mount Adams, but that requires a special permit that you have to get at the Trout Lake Ranger Station next year, probably online from recreation.gov. You have to buy it, and there's a limited number of those coming up. You could also try to go around the mountain on the Around the Mountain Trail, but that doesn't really go around Mount Adams because you can't, there's no trail on the Indian side. So you could go as far as Salt Creek here and turn back. But, you know, that whole south side has seen a lot of fires, is very heavily used. I'm going to recommend you go to the north side of Mount Adams. It's another 20-minute drive from Portland, but you leave a lot of the crowds behind. And here you can start at Talklock Lake, which is a car campground. You need reservations to get there, but you can get them midweek. And then it's just 2 miles over to the trailhead that takes you up to the Pacific Crest Trail. And this is one of the easier ways to get to the Pacific Crest Trail in this area. It's 3 miles and 1,500 feet of elevation, 1,300 feet of elevation. And you're in these timberline meadows. Now, this is a hike that's easy enough for kids. I know this because I took my grandkids there this summer and it worked. You start out, if you're taking grandkids, you want to start out at the car campground at Talklock Lake. And that's just a good idea because, I don't know, get your stuff together. And it's a good place to go swimming because there aren't any lakes up higher on Mount Adams. And then start at the Divide Camp Trail. Now, more popular is the Killing Creek Trail nearby, but it has horses. You have to have a parking permit for your car, and it's dustier. The Divide Camp Trail is closer to Portland, shorter, does not require a parking permit for your car. You can fill out the permit for entry in the wilderness, unlimited, free there in the box. And then it's not dusty, no horses to speak of, and you start out right in the wildflower meadows of lupin, and they just get better and better all the way up until you get to the Pacific Crest Trail. And here you'll, for the first time, you'll start seeing other people probably, because there are PCT through hikers passing through on this. If you go to the left here on the PCT for a quarter mile, you'll get to Adams Creek. Now this drains the Adams Glacier, this huge ice fall off the mountain. So it is a wild crossing. This year they have a log that's pretty good in there, but some years it's worth your life to get across that creek. It's a turnaround point for a lot of day hikers. If instead you go to the right on the Pacific Crest Trail, which is to say counterclockwise around Mount Adams, you wind up in this beautiful alpine country and cross the Lewis River. Now, this is the entire Lewis River where the Pacific Crest Trail crosses it. Down lower, it becomes this giant river with waterfalls and all. But up here, you can hop across it in one step. And it drains an area of fabulous wildflowers and little brooks and meadows and great places to explore. This giant boulder there is kind of occupied. Maybe if you look close at the top of the boulder, you can see who's whistling at you. When you get closer, you can see it's a hoary marmot. And they're all over in this area up there, and they will whistle madly at you to try to warn other marmots that there are people in that area. They obviously own this area and are outraged that people have discovered that Mount Adams has a beautiful, quiet side. It's the side of the Adams Icefall on the northwest side. And now we're going to switch from ice to fire. And that brings us to the Columbia Gorge, where 3 years ago, the Eagle Creek fire burned up most of the Oregon side. And of course, the fires this September that have burned over 1 million acres in Oregon and wiped out a number of very popular trails, Suisun Creek, but also Opal Creek, the Clackamas River trails, O'Lally Lake, Bridenbush Hot Springs. These are not, gone forever, but you're not going to be hiking them anytime soon, and they're going to look different. So let's look back at the Columbia Gorge. And there, all the trails have been rebuilt. Volunteers from the Trail Keepers of Oregon and here a youth conservation crew have spent 3 years rebuilding those trails, and they were all ready to open this spring when the coronavirus hit. And they had to be closed because there was no way to keep people from bumping into each other and spreading the virus. Multnomah Falls has sort of reopened, but not really. They only issue 100 permits a day. You have to buy them online at recreation.gov. You have to go at a certain time when you're allowed to park there. It's just not really a friendly day hike. Angel's Rest was briefly open before the virus closed it, and it's going to reopen probably this winter, and is a good example of what the Eagle Creek fire did in the Columbia Gorge. It didn't burn all the trees. In fact, most of the area, you can hardly tell that there was a fire. It just burned the underground brush and left the trees intact with the black scars on the lower parts of the trunk. At ridge crests, like here at Angel's Rest, the fires do burn uphill, and they crown out at the top of ridge crests. And that's why Angel's Rest had a view in the first place, because many other fires had done this too. Brush was starting to grow up here. The fire has cleared that view again. And so it's actually a better view, I think, after the fire. And to get away from the crowds at Angel's Rest, you have to go past Angel's Rest, because when they reopen this trail, there are going to be people picnicking all over that knoll. But if you go even 200 yards past it toward Joaquina Falls, there's nobody there. And there you can see how the forest has really regrown since the Eagle Creek fire. Of course, fireweed comes back. It's a pioneer plant after forest fires. It's all over, but so has tiger lily. And this is this spectacular flower that can be head high and have 30 blooms on one. But other flowers too. The bleeding hearts are native there, and you see them crowding alongside the trails. And candy flower. This is native little flower that's edible. The flower, the leaves, all of that is edible. That's why they call it candy flower. It's a Montia that you'll see coming back nicely after the fire. Beware not to confuse it with Stink Robert or Stinky Bob. This is an alien geranium that is not supposed to be in the gorge. It likes disturbed areas. It is thick along the freeway and at the trailheads. But if you get a quarter mile away from the disturbed areas of the freeway and the railroads and all that, then Stinky Bob dies out and you're back to native plants. But you still can't do a lot of these hikes, like Horsetail Falls. Well, yeah, you can get up to Ponytail Falls, half a mile, and then that's closed beyond that. So you're not going to do the Oneonta Creek loop right away, and you can't walk up Oneonta Creek Gorge. The old highway tunnel that they just opened and fixed up, it burned in the fire. You wouldn't think a tunnel could burn, but it was lined with timber and it did, so it's closed too. And Oneonta Gorge is closed not just because of the fire and the pandemic, but because it has a lot of native wildflowers that are endangered there. And it is a liability for the Forest Service. It's likely to never reopen. So you can't expect to wade there. The most popular trail after Multnomah Falls would be the Eagle Creek Trail, this gorgeous thing with waterfalls built back in the 1910s. At times they used dynamite to blast out trails along ledges, here to High Bridge. It did burn in the Eagle Creek fire. 8 bridges had to be replaced. They were replaced by helicopters. They was all ready to reopen when the virus hit, and they just knew that this was not going to be possible to social distance there. So you're not going to go to this Punch Bowl Falls on the Eagle Creek Trail. And even the trails that do reopen there are going to still have problems with overcrowding and parking. So maybe instead of going to that Punch Bowl Falls, go to a different one. There is a brand new trail near the Columbia Gorge, just a little bit further near the Hood River, where the Hood River itself forks into West Fork and an East Fork. And this Punch Bowl Falls had been recommended as a county park 100 years ago, but it's actually been only fairly recently that it made the grade. And it was the Western Rivers Conservancy that really helped out. They started out in 2016 by buying 100 acres and donating it to the county. And since then, a bunch more land has been acquired. And last summer, the Trail Keepers of Oregon built a 2-mile trail network there. A 2-mile loop is not that long, but it's a fun new hike that you can do in the other Punch Bowl Falls. The trail signs have very low mileages because nothing's very far in this park. You start out right away by going along the top of this stupendous chasm of columnar basalt and a rickety staircase on the other side that was part of an old fish hatchery that is still in operation on the far side. And then Punch Bowl Falls itself, where there's a viewpoint hanging right over the Punch Bowl, over the falls. And you'd think you wouldn't need a sign saying no diving when it's 150 feet straight down to rocks. But apparently some people need to get this message that this is not a place to jump in on a hot day, although you want to. And the place to do that would be at the confluence. And this is where the 2 forks of Hood River's West and East Fork join. And the new trail takes you down to the confluence itself and this cobble beach where you have the very cold water coming together here. Some people do manage to swim here, but this is glacier melt from Mount Hood, so it is often icy water. If you continue on the loop and you go up the other fork, the East Fork of the Hood River, you'll see that the trail crews have used natural rocks as stepping stones, had maybe a little too much fun here, left a gnome under one, peering out, and you get to a viewpoint of the East Fork. And the whole hike is only 2 miles. So you think, I drove all the way for this little thing? You need something more to round out the day? I've got that, just the thing for you. It's another half-day hike in the same area. And this is at the town of Mosier, which is near Hood River, right there in the Columbia Gorge. And just when you're thinking all the Columbia Gorge hikes are closed or crowded, or here's a new one. And this one was built with the help of the Friends of the Columbia Gorge. And it's part of their Gorge Towns to Trails initiative, where they're trying to connect towns with things to do, and eventually maybe make a trail that goes all the way around the Columbia Gorge. And so you start right in the town of Mosier at Main Street, at the Totem Pole Plaza downtown, and then a quarter mile across a historic bridge of the old Columbia River Highway, and then up past a waterfall to a loop on top of a summit plateau. So you start out there at Totem Pole Park, which does have a totem pole, and Main Street is real actual downtown of Mosier, and then cross the one of the remaining bridges from the original 1916 Columbia River Highway. And right at the end of this bridge is where the trail takes off and leads up through a cemetery. And the cemetery includes a number of tombstones. The tallest of them honors Jonah Mosier, who was the cabinet maker who founded the town in 1853 as a stagecoach stop. It didn't really take off, though, until the railroad came through in 1880. And at that point, people realized that you could plant orchards out there, get the fruit onto trains, and get it to market before it rots. This became the fruit boom, made the area wealthy. And Jonah Mosier himself was able to build a Victorian turreted mansion, which is still visible there behind that tombstone on the right, in downtown Mosier. Beyond that, you go past the waterfall, no swimming there, and then up into the area that was purchased by the Columbia Gorge by Nancy Russell. She was the founder of the Friends who set out to save the Columbia Gorge from the development, and much of it she did single-handedly, and the rest with the help of many more before she passed away from cancer a few years back. But this is really the legacy of what you can save and what you can do. A new trail that takes you to fabulous wildflower meadows. This picture is taken in April. In May, the balsam root come out in full force. That's our native sunflower, and also grass widows. All the flowers that you'd see at Dog Mountain or one of these other heavily crowded trails. Dog Mountain, we have to have permits and all of that now. You can see that in Mosier on a trail that only takes half a day, but is a great hike for kids. Now let's go up to Mount Hood. And first I want to take you to Lost Lake, which isn't really lost. It was called Heart of the Mountains by the native tribes there. Its official name, their name was Iiquali Matyum Isht, Heart of the Mountains. And then in 1880, an expedition of white explorers set out to find this lake. They couldn't find it, and they came back saying that they weren't lost, the lake was. So it's been Lost Lake ever since, except it's not lost. There are hundreds of campsites in the campground there, and a big resort and lodge and all of that. And as you enter on the paved road from Hood River, you pass a fee booth where they demand an $8 per car fee. I'm going to recommend that you do pay that, even though you don't have to, because actually the trail I'm going to recommend is not the 3-mile loop around Lost Lake, where you have to have a parking permit, but rather the Huckleberry Mountain Trailhead, which is not part of the area that the concessionaire controls. It's on National Forest land and doesn't require a parking permit. But arguing with the fee booth person, maybe not worth it, especially because there's another payoff I'll get to later. Anyway, if you drive through the campground and go to this trailhead, then it's 2 miles up to the Pacific Crest Trail, but a part of the trail that is rarely visited by anybody except through hikers. And then you could go over to this staircase rock slide with a rare view of the Bull Run watershed. And if you want, continue over to Buck Peak for an even better look around. So a very quiet trail at Lost Lake that starts on this back road beyond the campground. And again, it's not marked very well. It's so easy to drive by this without noticing that. But then when you do head up the Huckleberry Mountain Trail, as it's called, you will pass bunchberry carpeting the forest floor. And in early summer, it blooms and looks a lot like the dogwood tree flowers. It's actually very closely related in the same genus as the tree. It's just these have decided to become little wildflowers on the ground instead. They're called bunchberry because this time of year they have bunches of red berries. Don't eat them, but they're very pretty. The other flower that you'll see there, you might still see some of these, is cutleaf bugbane. And it's sort of hip high, pretty good sized thing, not a spectacular showy thing, but it is a wildflower that only grows at Lost Lake and at Watum Lake and nowhere else in the world, and is doing very well right along the trail here. I think it's very popular with the pikas. These are these little rabbit-like rodents that nibble on plants like this cutleaf bugbane and store the leaves in rock falls. And there's a number of rock slides on this hike where you're likely to be whistled at by these pikas, sort of smaller versions of the marmots. Then when you get up to the Pacific Crest Trail, that's Huckleberry Place. There's bring along buckets because this is full of huckleberries. You will see signs all along the Pacific Crest Trail saying, don't leave the trail to the west because that's the Bull Run watershed. Well, not exactly. It's actually the top of the ridge there and not the trail that's the border. So when you get to this very obvious rock slide with, I call it the staircase rock slide because it looks like a staircase, where the Pacific Crest Trail does a sharp corner, you can go up the rock slide 30 feet. This is legal. You're not in the watershed, and look down into the Bull Run watershed, one of the very few places anywhere where you can see Bull Run Lake and get a view right up to Mount Hood from the north side, not a side most people see. And notice that Bull Run Lake has an island in it, who knew, and nice close-up views of the mountain. You want to see the mountain even better, then hike another 2 miles over to Buck Peak, and the view there sweeps from Mount Hood on the right over to Lost Lake on the left. You almost see your car back down there at the far end of the lake. The other thing you will notice here at Buck Peak is jets from the heading to the PDX, the Portland International Airport. They fly right over this peak, and it seems like they're just like within stone's throw, but they're quiet because they're going in for a landing, but 2 minutes apart, jets are flying right over. If you've ever landed at PDX, you've probably flown over this, looked out the window at Mount Hood and thought, oh, I hope we're not spooking all those people out there trying to have a quiet wilderness experience. Well, here you can see it from the other side. And why did you buy that $8 parking permit? It's because after the hike, you're going to want to go to the lodge because they have a patio where they serve IPA ale and the Sasquatch burger out the window there. Social distance, put your feet up on a log, take a look at the lake and mountain. This is the place to unwind after a hike to a hidden trail at Lost Lake. Or you might want to do the parking permit just so that you're allowed to go to the lodge afterwards. And that takes us up to Mount Hood. Getting close to Mount Hood, going around Mount Hood used to be a problem, and it still kind of is. The Timberline Trail had been blocked by washouts, and this is because the glaciers at Mount Hood are melting. And this is the Elliott Glacier. It launched a glacial flood 15 years ago that washed out the Timberline Trail here and this bridge, all gone, left a canyon that the Forest Service closed to hikers for 10 years. There was a 30-mile detour and a $100 fine if you tried to get through. But now they've built a a slightly longer detour that takes you have to hop across on rocks. It's still iffy. There is no bridge, but you can hike around Mount Hood on the Timberline Trail again. Finally, the trail is a little longer, so it's now exactly 40 miles around the mountain. If you do that, you will pass other places where there used to be bridges and no longer are. This is the Sandy River on the way to Ramona Falls, another very popular hike. But the Forest Service used to put in a temporary footbridge there each spring. But a woman died when that bridge washed out, and the Forest Service realized that they were liable if they put in a bridge and people died there as a result of their bridge. But they are not liable if they don't have a bridge and you have to cross and it's much more dangerous. And that's the way wilderness should be. It's another way of, I guess, limiting crowds. So now you cross on fallen logs. And the trail to Ramona Falls just goes to a part of the river where the river's been undercutting a forest, dropping trees across the Sandy River. You can usually cross dry-footed there. If you want more bridges at Mount Hood, well, go to the new Mirror Lake Trail. This trail used to have a very bad parking near government camp right on the highway, and was steep and rocky, and the Forest Service replaced the whole thing with a new trail that starts at a nice parking lot and is a little bit longer, but not as steep, and has 8 new bridges and takes you up to Mirror Lake, where you get a mirrored reflection of Mount Hood. From there, you can go on up to Tom, Dick, and Harry Mountain and get a look down to Mirror Lake, and that's government camp off to the right. Well, that trail is a little muddy when it gets some rain. It's going to happen. And so maybe there are a lot of people on that trail to Mirror Lake. Instead of that one, why not go to Little Zigzag Falls? Now, this is kind of an overlooked hike right in that area. It's on an abandoned part of the old Mount Hood Loop Highway. So here in red is the Mirror Lake Trail, with the new trail in red, and in dots, the old abandoned trail that really and truly is closed. But they put highway barriers across the middle of Highway 26 now, so it's not possible to walk across that highway anymore. It was dangerous before. So instead, drive around over to the end of Kiwanis Camp Road, which is really the old Mount Hood Loop Highway. And where it dead ends is a half-mile trail into Little Zigzag Falls. And from the same place, you can hike to an old highway tunnel and Enid Lake and see a bunch of Mount Hood history. So this was the route of the Barlow Trail in 1846, and you will see parts of that old wagon route that went over Laurel Hill. And they named it Laurel Hill because it was fall when they went through. It's actually late October, trying to get their wagons through, and they gave up and complained about the rhododendrons that weren't blooming, and they thought that they were laurel instead of rhododendrons, but they were just brush to them. And then the Mount Hood Loop from 1923, which has been bisected by the modern Highway 26, but sections of it now are part of this hike. So if you hike into Little Zigzag Falls, half mile, easy, do it with the kids. Then at the trailhead, this is where the parking area is now. This is a picture taken in 1923, just when they opened the Mount Hood Loop Highway. And you see that concrete bridge abutment on the left. That's still there, but that is now part of where the highway is closed, and it becomes a hiking trail from there on to government camp. And just a quarter mile up that trail, you get to a tunnel underneath the abandoned highway that was built in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps. They wanted to sort of reopen the Barlow Trail as a historic route, but didn't follow the exact route. And but they wanted it to be open to horses. They call it the Pioneer Bridle Trail. And so they built the tunnel under the old loop highway tall enough so that a horseman could go through. You still can do it on horseback. It is more popular, though, now for mountain bikes, because it's a downhill rush from their government camp down to down the highway. So bits of the old highway now open to hikers, and you get to Enid Lake and bits of the Barlow Road. It's just a nice hike where you see a bit of history. Sam Barlow, who opened a very difficult route around Mount Hood and overcharged people a lot on this. And he had 2 toll gates. There's still toll gate campgrounds up there. But wheels have always been important in the Mount Hood area, trying to get around that mountain or over it or something. And a number of interesting mountain bike trails are on the east side of Mount Hood. And one of them makes a very good hike for hikers as well. And that's along the Dog River. And it starts on the highway south of Hood River, sort of where the Cooper Spur Road joins. And you won't see many mountain bikes for most of the route here. You can do it. You get up to a nice viewpoint. If you want to make a sort of a loop out of this, have a little shuttle car, that last zigzag trail is only open to hikers. So and then you could shuttle a car back to the trailhead and do this whole trail one way, but only if you're a hiker for that zigzag part. So the whole part of this canyon was ripped out by a flash flood in the 1990s and has been repaired. The trail starts out as an old road for a few feet, then crosses Dog River on a footbridge. And I like that it goes from a wet rainforest to a dry forest of ponderosa pine. And then you get to these viewpoints of Mount Hood. And if you are hiking, you can do the zigzag trail, which switchbacks back down to the highway. A fun, uncrowded trail that did not burn and does not require permits. One last trail I want to take you to with no permits or crowds is on the east side of Mount Hood and Ball Point in the Badger Creek Wilderness. And the best way to get here really is from the Dalles, to drive all the way around to the east side from the Dalles and get up to the School Canyon trailhead, hike to Ball Point, and my destination, I'd say, would be go to this helispot. It's in the wilderness. There's no more helicopters landing there, but it was once a helispot and has an interesting terrain. So you start out by driving through the ghost town of Friend, and it's just a ghost town. The trail sign is facing the wrong way and shot up, so it's a little bit hidden, but there is a real trail that heads up School Canyon Trail with no school and no canyon. But and this time of year, it's pretty dry. But in spring, that's ablaze with balsam root. And even now, there are Mariposa lilies still blooming up there on that trail. Part of this area did burn, but it's coming back with millions of seedlings. So it's green all the way up. You get into these interesting rock formations, and then a trail junction, and then this helispot. Now, this is where fire crews brought helicopters. Before it was a wilderness. Now it's a campsite. But from there, 100-yard unmarked, unofficial trail leads out to these weird rock formations where you're looking down into the canyon, hundreds of feet. It's just a wild, remote, cool place that's off the beaten track. You won't have to worry about social distancing in a place like that. You won't have to worry about fires. And it's so important to get out now, and especially after we've had a smoke-timber, another month of smoke. Seems to be a common thing, but people are antsy to get out of the house. I think it's important for mental health as well as physical health to get out and hike. And you're not going to really do that very well in the Columbia Gorge or at Dog Mountain, where you have to have permits on summer weekends and ride a shuttle car and blah, blah, blah. And in places like Mount Jefferson, Three Sisters, starting next year, they'll have a permit system with limited entry for 20-some trailheads and all backpacking. That's one way to limit crowds. Another way is to simply have the trails be so crowded that people don't want to go there. And that's sort of been the answer in the Columbia Gorge. But I think there's another way, and that is to go where the crowds aren't. And I was thinking of using these symbols in my book to show which trails are uncrowded. If you got there using social media, and it was one of the top 10 or top 3 trails recommended on Facebook or Twitter or something, everybody else is going to be there too, staring at their phones. If you got it from one of these books that I write, for example, I cover 1,000 trails in Oregon. this one for the Portland area has 100 featured trails, but then 99 more at the back of the book. And I've expanded the book, added 16 pages so that you can do these extra hikes. You've got the maps and all that. There's really 200 trails that you can do near Portland. Very few of them are crowded. It's just a matter of knowing where to go to get away. And in Oregon, it's a beautiful place where in one tank of gas, you can go from a coastline, this gorgeous, where the whole coast is open to the public, and then to mountains with glaciers, and on the same tank of gas, wind up in what looks like the Sahara Desert, but is the John Day fossil beds of Eastern Oregon. That kind of diversity gives us a lot of opportunity, but it also gives us a responsibility to protect and know these areas. Now, I was raised to believe that you should leave a campsite in as good shape as you found it. And I believe the same is true of a state as well. And that's difficult in Oregon as more people move here, often because of the recreation. It's tempting to just crowd back onto the same places. But especially now, when we need to get out, it's important to stay socially distanced, find these less crowded trails, get away from the trails that are burned. There are lots. And I encourage you to take a look. And I think a good place to start is by exploring some of the new hikes that I found in Northwest Oregon and Southwest Washington. And that's my talk. And I'll turn it back over to Anne-Marie now to see if any of you have any questions that maybe I can answer.
Thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge and inspiring us all to get out on the trail. If all of you attendees, if you have any questions, if you want to type them into the little chat function, you'll see that down on the menu. It looks like a little conversation bubble, and I can moderate them here, and Bill will answer them.
Yeah, glad to.
One question, Bill, I am wondering, I found myself in Central Oregon, and I neglected to bring your Eastern Oregon book with me, but I wanted to go a little farther east to escape the smoke. Are your books available in ebook form at all?
They are. You can get them on Kindle as an ebook. They're less expensive. They actually have all color pictures, more information than the print books, and I update them every year. I update the print books every year too, but it's kind of, you can, if you've got a Kindle version, you can get the next year's update for free. Just ask for the update. So, and then you have them on your phone. For every hike in the state. I guess the drawback is if you're out hiking with your phone and the battery goes dead, or you drop the phone in the creek, you can't use it anymore. If you have the physical book and you drop it in a creek, you can still read it.
Right. Well, thank you. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions that they want to have answered by Bill?
Well, I guess we covered the ground there then.
All right.
I did sort of anticipate a few questions about the September fires, which trails have been burned. Now that it's really started pouring rain, the fires are very much limited now. They're not likely to expand much more. And so I've posted on my website, OregonHiking.com, on the trail updates page, which trails have been affected by the fires this September. In fact, you can find all of the updates for the last 5 years. For free there, OregonHiking.com. So that's another resource.
Fantastic. All right. Well, if nobody has any questions to add here, or maybe are having a little technical difficulty, I know this Teams platform could be a little tricky. So I have been recording the session, so I will get that edited and uploaded to our YouTube channel. So thank you so much, Bill, for letting us do that and for sharing your knowledge with the Tigard community.
It's been a pleasure hiking with you.